Okay, we're going to move on to the next part of our program. We've heard the challenge, now we're going to hear the truth. And our speakers for the truth, our first speaker is Dr. Robin Skrine, who is a private practice MD. Prior to starting her own practice, she was the medical director of the Breast Cancer Center, the Breast Center at Hillcrest Baptist Medical Center in Waco. After her, we will hear from Sheila Patterson, who is a survivor of both ovarian and breast cancer, and a member of the Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship Breast Cancer Support Group. And after Ms. Patterson, we will hear from Mercedes Cruz, who for the past 27 years has worked in government Medicaid and CHIP funded programs, and for the past 15 years have spoke on behalf of the American Heart Association. I'm going to give you each the choice of either coming up here and speaking, or you can stay there at the desk and speak.
I'm a low talker. Oh, you have the mic? I think this makes me perhaps a little bit more approachable, and it's certainly more comfortable. Thank you for having me tonight. Kind of an update, when we set this program in motion this year, I was still in Fort Worth. I am now back in Waco as the medical director at Baylor Scott & White Hillcrest, and we'll see where it goes from there. So sorry for being late, but I was driving up from Waco. So what is the truth? We all remember Tuskegee. And Tuskegee is not the only incident of research that brings fear into our hearts, but I think it's the most memorable. And so when we think of clinical trials and we think of research, that's what we think of. The truth is, because of Tuskegee and other experiments like that and other research like that, research and clinical trials are highly regulated. And if there is any evidence that you are doing anything inappropriate, they will shut you down in a minute. And, you know, part of doing a clinical trial is to have your work published. If you are not sanctioned by an IRB or an internal review board, you're not going to get published. And the IRBs are what regulate these clinical trials. So Tuskegee was the nidus for that change, but now when it comes to clinical trials, nobody's going to be experimenting on you willy-nilly. The consent that you sign is very thorough. There are very strict rules about enrolling patients, and they will make absolutely sure that you understand the clinical trial and how it works and what the expectations are. So I think one of the important things to know is that nobody's going to be experimenting on you with all sorts of untoward, terrible, and neglected effects. The next point that I think that's important to make is when we hear clinical trial, we also think, oh my goodness, it's some strange drug that nobody's ever taken before, and when I take it, I'm going to grow 6 heads. The reality of it is that most clinical trials, when we're talking medications, these medications already have FDA approval. They are typically, though, being used in another way or for another disease process. And somebody has discovered that, oh, this may work for this problem or in this area. And so the clinical trial is to prove that it's effective in another way and to get FDA approval. So usually, I mean, sometimes there are clinical trials where it's a brand new drug, but there are steps that they must go through in order to even get to that point where they can do a clinical trial on a brand new drug. But for most of us, what we're going to be exposed to is not a new drug. It's a drug that has been proven to be pretty safe, just perhaps used in a different way. And the last point that I would like to make that I think that's really important about the truth is, as minorities, if we don't participate, we don't know how these drugs will help or hurt us. The best example I have is actually anecdotal. It's personal. It's a medication for congestive heart failure, and this was probably about 15 years ago, and they enrolled my mother-in-law in a clinical trial for this drug for congestive heart failure. Because of that drug, she probably lived an additional 7 or 8 years. But what they discovered about this drug is that it's effective in treating congestive heart failure only or primarily in African Americans. It's not effective in other populations. And so now, if you prescribe that drug for somebody who's African American and has CHF, the insurance company will approve it. If they're not African American, they won't. So you can't say, oh, well, let other people participate, and then if it works, I'll take it. If we don't participate, we won't know how it will affect us. So it's important to educate ourselves. It's important to ask questions. And I guess the biggest message that I'd like to leave and what I tell most people is advocate. You've got to advocate for yourself in your health care, especially if you have some untoward disease process. You can always ask your doctor, do you know of any clinical trials? Do you know where I can get information on clinical trials? And am I getting the best care possible? Are we really doing what we should be doing? If you can't advocate for yourself, and sometimes we can't, I watched my adopted mom get railroaded by her orthopedic surgeon because he didn't want to hear her. And she's a very vibrant, vocal woman, but she's also a senior citizen, and he kind of just overran her. She brought me. So if you can't advocate for yourself, bring somebody with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Skrine. Our next speaker is Ms. Sheila Patterson. Ms. Patterson.
Good evening, everyone. So when I was asked to do this, I took the survey out and I asked church members, family members, sorority members, members of our cancer society, in our church group. So these are the things that they told me. So many of these things I'm going to be reading to you so I can make sure I say exactly what they said. When I asked them, many told me they didn't want to be guinea pigs. That's why. They didn't want to be risk takers by doing anything that will upset their quality of life. Many had previously experienced inequalities and discrimination in health care, thus displaying fear and lack of trust in the unknown due to the fact that, as we've talked about the Tuskegee syphilis study in 1932 to 1972 that caused harm and death to many men of color. And then I'm sure you heard about the movie that Oprah Winfrey brought to us about Henrietta Lacks, and she had an immortal cell called the HeLa cell, and through those cells they are still using it, and it is responsible for the development of the polio vaccine and other therapies. However, these immortal cells were taken without her consent and mass-produced globally. To this date, her family has not received compensation or recognition for the mass reproduction and scientific advances made by the Lack human cells. So that's some of the reasons. Other reasons is, although most of the trials are free, many people can't afford the travel time back and forth, the work off without pay. So they're asking for increase in monetary compensation so that they will be able to afford to do these things. They ask for more clarity, make it simple, easy to read medical information, and honesty in layman terms. Most of people are not medical technicians, so they need it in layman's terms, and to include all of the possible side effects and adverse reactions. One participant stated that her information was given in 5 to 10 minutes during a medical appointment, and it was not user-friendly. It was all in medical terms and would right over her head. They asked for updates to be supplied on how the trials are improving the health benefits, and one-on-one chats with patients and with the physicians so that they can pass on this information to their patients. It was also recommended that we ask those who, in fact, this is what my sister-in-law who just gave her testimony, she said that it is recommended to ask those who've gone through clinical trials to share their testimonies with us, because hearing about the benefits and healing is always encouraging and motivating to know what others have gone through and were healed, are like ours. They share that information, or we find out that some people have gone through worse situations that we're in, and they still have hope and are recovering. For example, I'm going to give a little of mine. When I was diagnosed with my second bout of cancer, breast cancer, I asked my oncologist, Dr. Gandhi, well, actually, I told him that I did not want to have radiation and chemo. What options are out there that I don't have to take that? And he had just read an article about the results of a clinical trial and how the mammoprint was now on the market. So he tested 70 of my genes from my biopsy and my blood to see if chemo or radiation was even going to be beneficial to me. We caught it because I know my body and try to keep up with anything that looks a little strange. None of my friends nor my other doctors had even heard of the mammoprint. But praise the Lord, because of thousands of women participating in the mammoprint clinical trial, my mammoprint results were a survival rate of at least 93% without no significant benefits of chemo or radiation. Most people did not know that you may not have to have chemo or radiation. And I only have to take one anti-estrogen pill for the next 5 to 10 years. Even though the cost of this test was over $4,000, we convinced my medical insurance that $4,000 is a lot less than taking chemo or radiation repeatedly, and so they covered it. Right now, I'm participating in a clinical trial. It's really a fun one, and because they're testing how exercise can reduce the effect and the return of cancer, and I'm receiving a small monetary compensation. So it was also recommended by my friends, family, sorority members, church members, that marketing and recruiters need to get more word out to the community about the clinical trials by providing information in the internist's office, in the surgeon's office, in the clinics, in the emergency rooms, in the radio stations, etc. So even though you may not have cancer, you probably know someone who does have cancer, and you can pass that information on to them. If you notice my bio, I am a retired public school administrator, and this is my ministry now. I am the chairperson of my sorority, and yes, she went squee-wee. That's my sorority sister down there. Also, and there's my sorority. All the AKAs, just raise your hand. Okay, all the deltas, raise your hand. Okay. All the other divine 9, raise your hand. Okay, now we've covered everybody. So I want you to know that our sorority has been supporting breast cancer awareness for decades. And now our new target for 2018 through 2020 22, I'm going to read it to you, is to raise community awareness about clinical health issues impacting the quality and longevity of the lives of African American women with emphasis on breast cancer awareness. So it just so happens that I'm the chairperson of that committee. So you know that we will, AKAs will know about the clinical trials. So that is the results of my family and friends of why they felt that they didn't know enough, they were afraid, and if you share information, I'm sure they would be happy to be a part of it.
Thank you. Before Ms. Cruz speak, I want to remind all of our medical personnel to make sure that you complete the pre and post segment of each of, we've heard the challenge, now we're almost done with the truth, so we want to make sure everyone complete the pre and post segment of each of the talks. Our next speaker, Ms. Mercedes Cruz.
Good evening. So, I guess by obvious default, I represent the Hispanic community. I always try to make it funny anyways. But first, I have to give you a little bit more background than my bio so that you can understand what I'm going to say about the truth. I have heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, recovering from 3 strokes. And yes, I have participated in a lot of studies. I just signed up for my last one last week for heart disease. So again, I am not immune to that. But so the truth is that I wouldn't participate in a study if I wouldn't have the medical condition. And that's some of the things that happens with the population that I've served. I have been around for a long time. I have taught a lot of classes, so a lot of people have come through my classes, and I do get a lot of feedback. I teach 90% in Spanish. So some of the people that I talk to, that I have shared my stories of the successes and and the challenges of some of the medicines that I have tested and some of the clinical trials that I have been in, they say, why? I don't have that. What does it matter? They're not gonna change that. So the truth is, unless you get confronted with a disease or something that is particularly interested to you, then you're not really going to do anything about it. Okay, and that's honestly, I got connected with American Heart because my father died at 44 of a massive heart attack. So I wanted to know what I was fighting. You can't fight something that you don't understand. So, but if it wasn't that, then I probably wouldn't have been providing volunteer services for 15 years, teaching for free on their behalf until it impacted me. Another thing is I represent the outreach. So in my personal job that I do 23 counties, and my job is to put education out there, but also awareness about health insurance. So one of the things that I find is that a lot of the people that don't have health insurance are not gonna be at your doctor's office so that you can tell them about that awesome trial. They're not gonna be there. So what you're gonna have to do, the truth is you're gonna have to get out there in the health fairs that I'm in. You go to a health fair and you'll see a bank, you'll see all these other entity marketing, right? And they'll go there because it's a service that's being provided in their community. They don't have to travel very far, and they'll get that information. If you're gonna wait for them to go to the doctor for that medical condition, you're probably only going to get them at the emergency room at the last stages of the disease. And that's just the honest truth about that. So pretty much we need to get out there. We need to make the information less complicated. I have 21 certifications. And I teach chronic disease management. I've been doing it for a long time. And I still can't understand half of the stuff that they give me for me to read. And I read. I love reading. So I'm like, okay, and what does that mean? English is my second language, not my first. So I think in Spanish and I translate in English. So even when I'm reading, I'm like, en español, ¿qué quiere decir eso? Espérate. Oh, okay, so that's what that means. You have to, that's the truth when you're wanting to deal with the Hispanic people. Even if they speak English, It's still their second language. So your word means something to you, but not mean exactly the same to me in my brain. So I have to like put the whole sentence together, and now it makes sense. That's what they're trying to use with that word that may be 10 meanings. And if you know, in English, you can say one sentence. In Spanish, it's a whole paragraph when you translate. So just letting you know about that, because I catch myself being part of studies. I've always understood that as a godly person, that I may not save myself from a lot of things, but I'm going to mean something for somebody else. So I volunteer to be not the guinea pig, go willingly, and knowing that you got to be the change you want to see in the world. So.
Okay, let's give another round of applause for all of our speakers, please.